Hey everybody, we're in beautiful Portola Valley, and this county of San Mateo is just, the beauty just never ends. And we're at the home of someone whose story is very compelling, and you're going to hear it in a few minutes. But as we think of love, and as I prepared this whole series, the thought came to me, what we're going to talk about this week is probably the most challenging aspect of love. It's very easy for me to love my family or even my neighbors, people in the church, people who love me back, people who I have a relationship with. The most challenging aspect for me when it comes to love is loving my enemies. I'm not just talking about people who may disagree with me. I'm talking about loving people who intentionally want to harm me. Jesus said he wants to so fill our hearts with his Spirit and with such power that we love with the love of another kind. We love people who actually want to harm us. And he actually gave us a blueprint in his word for how to do that. That's what we're going to look at in our time together. But before we get there, I want you to come into a story of someone who was faced with this very circumstance of how do I love people who really wanted to harm me. Watch this. We're at the home of one of my heroes and a very good friend, Dorothy Bachler, who is no stranger to the Peninsula Covenant community. But as we talk today about loving your enemies, Dorothy has an amazing story regarding that, and she's been very gracious to be able to share that with us. Dorothy, 9/11. Why don't you bring us in? Your husband was on Flight 93 that went down. Can you tell us a little bit about when you first realized that Andy was on that flight and the reality of what took place happened to you that morning?
So the morning of September 11th, 2001, I woke early, as I always did. I was on the phone with my prayer partner, and we didn't know really anything was happening other than the two towers had been struck. And it was sometime after that the employee that worked for us called me from his airplane and said, "Do you know what's going on?" And he said the planes are being grounded and that his flight was being diverted to, I forget where at the time. And I asked him about Andy's flight, and he said, "I'm sure he's fine. He took off on a parallel runway," and that I should call United. So I did that. I called United, and they said their flight has passed that area of no return, and they're going to be landing in San Francisco at 11:30. So I never really gave it another thought. I was to pick Andy up at the airport, so I took my shower and did whatever I did in the morning. And it was, after that my son called. And he was hysterical and said, "Mom, what flight was Dad on?" And I said he was on United Flight 93. And he just let out a primal scream. And he told me that flight had crashed. Mm. And I sort of argued with him because I said, "No, that's not right. I just talked to United," and they said everything was fine and they would be landing. And then, of course, after that, I realized that no, it wasn't. Mm.
So at some point, that unbelievable tragedy, you realized that it wasn't just a plane malfunction, that someone was actually behind this. Then what went through your mind? And at what point did that come into the picture?
Well, when I had called United, I received a telephone call back because there was, if you recall, all they showed was a field,
right,
and no airplane,
right,
just sort of a smoldering hole.
Right.
And it said for information along the bottom to call this 800 number, which I did. And they wanted to know what my name was, what my relationship was to the person I was calling about, and then they wanted to know, was he a U.S. citizen, which I thought was a very interesting question. I didn't think about it at the time. And so someone called me back and told me that the plane had terrorists on it, and that it had crashed, and that there were no survivors.
Because I know the story a little bit, very quickly you came to a place where you realized you needed to forgive. Can you bring us into that part of the story?
Mm-hmm. I remember either going to bed that night or waking up the next morning thinking about Esther and her saying, "Here I am." And all I could think of was, I know that God is in control and that nothing happens that he doesn't know about. And I was scared to death to be alone. But it was like, okay, you've got to put your faith where your mouth is. And do you really believe that God can take care of you? And you need to forgive. We must have been just studying it or talking about it, but I know that my whole life I've had to do a lot of forgiving. And so forgiveness is important to me because I want to be right with God. And I believe that if I'm not forgiving, that he's not going to forgive me. And so I thought, I don't want to be terrorized the rest of my life by these people. So I chose to forgive and pray for them and just not be terrorized in that area.
What did that look like? I mean, it sounds so almost robotic as you speak about it now, 8 years removed. But what was it like? Was that easy to do? Was it difficult to do?
I don't remember that it was difficult. I really don't. I so want to please God in my life. And I knew it was the right thing to do. And I remember saying that, okay, Lord, if there's anything you want me to talk about Andy's faith, here I am. I can do that. And maybe what was going through the back of my mind, I mean, I can only imagine that if I wasn't all forgiven up, that God couldn't use me.
Yeah. So looking back now, how did forgiving, what part did it play in your healing process? As you look back 8 years, what part did that aspect play?
Oh, I think forgiving them was pivotal, because I don't hold bitterness, and I know that probably sounds strange, and I've been asked about it a lot, but I don't have bitterness. I am not happy with what happened. Of course, maybe I don't even know what word to use for that emotion, but I can forgive and move on with that.